Hi, I'm Phil Cooke, and I believe everybody has a story they need to tell. And very often, people desire to tell that through a book. Maybe it's a memoir, maybe it's the history of your life, your autobiography, or maybe you have a message that you feel called to share on some other subject. Today, we're going to talk about publishing. I'm interviewing John Mason from Insight International in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And John published my most recent book, Maximize Your Influence. And he's going to give us some real insight into what it takes to get your book published today. You know, the publishing industry is going through what the music industry went through about 10 years ago. We're moving from traditional publishing to self-publishing to hybrid publishing. There's a lot of options out there. So today, if you have a real dream or a desire to publish a book, write a book, whatever, we're going to talk about how to get your story out there in the form of a book, either an ebook or a print book, or however you feel like you want to do it. We're going to be talking about all the options and how the industry's changed and what you need to know. Stay tuned with John Mason. John Mason, I am thrilled that you're on the podcast. We've known each other since college. You helped me in the publication of my most recent book, Maximize Your Influence. And you've written for a lot of people. You've coached a lot of people with writing. You've published a lot over the years. Let's go back a little bit and tell me how you got into this whole writing and publishing thing to begin with.
Well, it goes back to actually the 1980s, if you can imagine, the late 80s. I was doing consulting work for mostly churches and ministries. And I was also coaching high school basketball. I know if you meet me, you won't immediately think that I'm a high school basketball coach kind of a person, because I'm only 5'8". But one of the kids that played for me, his dad was the president of a publishing company. Uh-huh. And he thought that the publishing house could use my services. So I got involved in publishing kind of through the back door with helping them. And I ended up being the director of operations eventually. And it introduced me to the whole publishing world. And as I got involved in it, I also began to get the itch to write books, which I'd never considered. You know, it's one of those surprising things that happens sometimes. That you end up doing something that you never in a million years would have thought you'd do.
Yeah.
But I had this desire to write a book, and so I began to write this book. And if you want, I'll talk about this a little later. But I think some of the things that I did on my very first book, which was called An Enemy Called Average, really made a huge difference in the success of it, and I think will be helpful to the people that are listening today. But anyway, so I wrote my first book. And I was actually, in effect, the number 2 man at the publishing house. And they were not interested in publishing it, even though I was in that position, because I didn't have any platform. I didn't have any previous book selling history. And so we struck a deal where they agreed to distribute the book. They would buy it from me and then resell it.
Okay.
And what happened was the book started selling like crazy. Surprisingly, without any marketing, just a line listing on an order form of about 700 other books.
But I have to admit, it's a great title. An Enemy Called Average is a brilliant, brilliant title. I have to say that.
And I mean, I could prove that because it was simply the title on the order form, and it began to sell like crazy. And I think within the first 3 months of just on the order form, they sold about 15,000. And now all of a sudden they were interested in signing me to a publishing deal, but I wasn't interested in signing with them at that point. So I continued to do it on my own. That first year, it sold over 110,000 books. And it was either number 1 or number 2 of all the books that they did that year. And so I got involved in publishing and almost at the same time as an author. And I've continued to be in both of those worlds ever since. As a result of the book's success, and in part my experiences in publishing, I did launch really 2 organizations at the same time. One was Insight International, which is a nonprofit, and the other is Insight Publishing. And 95% of everything we do is through Insight International, the nonprofit, where we're helping authors, and I was doing my speaking and writing books through there because of the book's successes. And that is all the way back in 91. So I just realized that's been 30 years ago.
Yeah. And the publishing world was a whole different thing back then.
Oh, yeah. I did work at a traditional publishing house, and it was the same kind of scenario where you would sign people to book contracts where the publishing
Right.
house would own the contract, own the rights, and also back then the royalties were very low, and there was
Yep.
at the place that I was actually working at, they were not doing any advances, and that was a little unusual in the overall publishing scene, but they didn't do any advances back then, and they did a lot of work with, because this was a Christian publisher, about almost 40% of their customer base was church bookstores. And
Okay.
that's something
Which,
that almost doesn't exist anymore.
yeah.
But they're a substantial amount. I think they had, I want to say 4,000 or 5,000 church bookstores that they actually sold books to. And,
Wow.
and so that was a pretty substantial part of their business model. And then the rest were your traditional bookstores. But back then, Phil, there was a lot of independent, Christian book nook kind of places.
Yep.
I believe Family Bookstore was open at the time. It had already started, and they were by far the biggest. But there was very much a kind of a smaller profile of a lot in terms of size of bookstores back then.
Well, just very briefly, give us a little idea of how much things have changed since those days.
Well, it's changed a lot. I think mostly in terms of technology and
Yep.
the ability to print less books, the ability to print electronic books, and the ability also now to sell easier to direct to the consumer. And so that's kind of really shaken the publishing world up, and that's why you see the difficulties that small independent bookstores have had, and a
Yep.
lot of those have gone away. And candidly, I think in the Christian side of things, a lot of those were kind of business slash ministries. So they were trying to offer books in maybe an area where the commercial guys won't come in and put a store, so that the people would come in and do that. But it's
Yeah.
changed a lot. Obviously, there's bigger opportunities to sell books much wider. Back then, international sales were a factor, but they were very small. But now
Yeah.
it's a pretty substantial part of most publishing houses' strategy is to sell books all over the world. And in fact, I've been very blessed. I have books now in 40 different languages around the world, and
Wow.
it's pretty astonishing. I actually get paid on some of them. It's a whole different world when you start
That's
doing that.
nice.
But it's a blessing. You'll get responses from people all over the world. But with ebooks now, I mean, as you know, as somebody can order right now one of your books from New Zealand while we're talking, and they might actually
Yeah.
do that, and they can read it, as they go anywhere they go with the different kinds of
Yeah.
devices. So it's
So,
changed a lot in that regard.
in many ways, the shift, what do you call it? Publishing on demand, print on demand, has been a real core part of that shift because, like you say, now if somebody orders in South Africa, the book is printed on demand and mailed into them, right? That's pretty much Amazon is print on demand?
A physical book, it probably doesn't make a lot of sense because the cost to get it there would be pretty high. Some of
Yeah.
these print-on-demand publishers do have or printers, print-on-demand printers have locations in different parts of the world. So sometimes you can get it, delivered that way. But most of that international is going to be, electronic. But there are people that buy the physical book
Yeah.
and pay an extra high freight cost to get it there because they still want that physical book. And interestingly
But
enough, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, but here in the US, even if someone orders my book on Amazon, that book is printed. Amazon doesn't keep boxes or shelves of my book available. They print it on the spot, right?
In most cases, what happens is if there's enough demand for the book, they will, make a decision to maintain an inventory of your book.
Okay.
So it makes sense, and they can kind of prove that there's enough people buying the book that it justifies them warehousing it. But yes, and especially at the start, the books are completed or printed on demand, one at a time. I mean, I've actually been to the place where they actually do the production, and it's astonishing. A single machine will print 50 different titles going to the same place, and it all gets packaged together. It's pretty astonishing. Literally one by one, they print the inside, they bind it, they print the cover, they bind it, they trim it, the whole bit, and it's done on demand. And it used to be that the quality was less. It's a lot better. It's not still quite as good as a book that's at an offset press. And they still can't do some of the extra bells and whistles on the cover that you can at a typical, large printing house. So there are a few limitations on print on demand, and the cost per book is much higher because you're doing them one at a time.
So let's talk about this whole transition and how the industry's changed. I mean, in the old days, in the traditional publishing days, and that still exists today in many ways, an agent, a writer, an author would have to find an agent to go pitch him to different publishing houses unless he had an open door to a particular publishing house. I've been approached a couple times for a few of my books directly from the publisher, but mostly it's through an agent. And then they take the manuscript. It takes them probably about a year to get the thing finally published and on the street. That's the traditional model that most of us are used to. And many people still think if you're a serious author, if you're the real thing, that's the way you need to go. But hybrid publishing, self-publishing, that's just opened up a whole new world out there. And it's really hard to tell the difference between the two. And the self-publishing or hybrid model has opened its doors to a lot more people. Anyone potentially can get published these days in that way. Talk to me a little bit about the difference. If I'm an author, do I want to go that traditional route that you did early in your career? Or do I want to go more self-published or hybrid published? What decisions do I need to be thinking about?
There are distinct advantages and disadvantages to both approaches. Here's the reality. It used to be that, when you published on your own, it was considered a vanity publishing,
right?
And it got kind of a bad name. But what's happened over the years as this hybrid model has come about, the options now for each author are multiple. In fact, there's a lot of what we're seeing now is a lot of traditionally published authors are actually choosing to do it on their own.
Yeah, Seth Godin is a good example.
Let's talk about the pluses and minuses. So the traditional approach, first of all, it's very difficult to get a traditional publishing contract. What's changed somewhat is that it's gone from being content focused. In other words, the content is necessary, or the publisher might really believe in the message and want to be joined together kind of ministry wise to get the book out to bless people. That kind of was the model for a long time. I mean, there was that, I know the house that I first started working at, they really did care about the content. Now, I'm not saying they don't care about the content now, but what's more important, candidly, is the person's platform and their previous book selling history.
Yeah.
And I'd say 95% or more of books that are published are from authors like that. So if you're an unknown person, it's very unlikely that you're going to get a book published with a traditional house. And Phil, they don't accept any unsolicited manuscripts anymore. This has been going on for quite a while. Yeah. The publishers don't even open them. There's actually a clearinghouse. I don't know if people know this, but there's actually a clearinghouse where the bigger publishers send these unsolicited manuscripts to, and this clearinghouse will sift through them and sometimes refer them to kind of preferred self-publishing companies to follow up with them on. Or now a lot of these big publishers have their own self-publishing arm that they have a different name on that they use. So on the traditional side, the advantages are that there's no cost to the author up front. They don't have to pay for any of the production costs at all, or any of the marketing expenses. They do give all the rights to that book to the publishing house, and it's really for the life of the book. Used to be that they might revert the rights back to authors if it stopped selling. In fact, in most contracts back years ago, it was always in the contract that if it's sold less than X number of books a year, they just give the rights back to the author. Well, because of electronic publishing and on-demand publishing, the publishers are never going to give the rights back to an author, because they can They can sell that book on demand, and they don't have to warehouse it. They don't have to even do anything to get those sales. So if you go with a traditional house, you have to realize that they're going to own all the rights to that book, and they're going to control the cover and the content a lot. You'd be surprised how much interaction there is with the authors on the content. Even myself, which I write motivational, inspirational books, and not controversial really at all. They're very positive, and right. I get pushed back around a little bit, even with my kind of books, which would never be described as controversial. With the publishers, and for the most part, a lot of the editing that they do in that regard is good, but there's that thing that's there that you don't want it to change what you really believe. And I remember encountering a number of books where the editors were like trying to change what this guy said because they didn't agree with the theology, and it was amazing. You'd be surprised how much there is that interaction, even on the title, subtitle, back cover. For the most part, they don't respect what the author thinks about most of that. Candidly, they care that they don't want you to hate it, but they give you a little bit of input there. With me, a little bit.
Well, I think we have to remember that traditional publishing is a business, and they want to make money, and they don't care that this is your dream project. They don't care that this is your life story. They don't care that you sweat blood to get this manuscript done. I know in one of my books that I did with the traditional publisher, we just had knockdown dragouts about the cover design, about the inside page design of the book, about some of the chapters in the book and the order, the way we do it. And I mean, real knockdown dragouts. And it's one of the things that soured me about traditional publishing. Doesn't mean I won't do it again in the future sometime, but it was not a good experience because they just had, everything they promised me up front when I signed the deal, they pretty much reneged on later. So people need to understand that they want to try to make money, and they have a formula, and they have a way they like to do it, and a strategy, and it needs to try to fit in that. Otherwise, you could really butt heads on a lot of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is too, Phil, is that they're going to lose interest in your book pretty quickly. There's 3 selling seasons in the traditional world, and they pre-sell your book before it ever comes out, and they're really not thinking a lot. This sounds crazy, but they're really not thinking all that much about your book when it comes out because they've already pre-sold it. They're going to see if it takes off, and if they do, they might do a little bit more. But they're only going to present your book for sales to the key accounts one time. I mean, there are exceptions occasionally when something unusual happens, but they only do it one time, and that's it. And so this is where a lot of authors get frustrated, is that they don't see anything happening after the first month or two, but they're on to the next sales season. They're into the next acquisition of a book. And like you said, the normal process is, and I'll give you a direct example. I have to deliver Now, I ended up doing about 60% of my books with traditional publishers and about 40% on my own. And I sold over 1 million both ways. I've been very blessed. I probably have sold a little more on my own. So I've been in both of those worlds, and so in this next case, I have a book that by contract I have to deliver on April the 1st. It will not come out until April of 2023, but I have to deliver the manuscript then. And I have a book coming out in this April that I delivered last April. That'll be out, and it's called Beat Self-Defeat. So it's about not being your own worst enemy. So that's kind of the pattern of it. So you write this book for maybe 6 months to a year, then you give it to them. Then they're going to take a year before the book actually comes out, and that's because they do a couple of rounds of edits. This is why.
Plus, if you're writing on a timely subject, is something a current affair, current event, that kind of screws that up. If the book's not, you're writing about the event, it takes you a year or more to write the book. Then it takes a year to get it to the street. The event's pretty much over. So
which is why. But we do a lot of helping them write their books. We collaborate with them to help write their books. And I had an author, so famous, I can't tell you who it is because I signed a 12-page non-disclosure agreement. But I'll just say it this way: it was a topic that was so completely timely, tied in with last year's election cycle. that had to be delivered by a certain date. And, it would be a completely worthless book if it came out right now, because it would have missed that whole election cycle. And so that author, who was offered a $2 million advance, okay, they wanted to self-publish it. And now we didn't get to actually do the self-publish, but we did help with the writing part of it. And they chose to go that route because, number one, they could control everything about the content, the packaging, the titling, and all of that. And so we were privileged to help with all of that, even the titling and all that. We were very involved, but they controlled it all, and they had the wherewithal and the stature to sell. The day it came out, they sold 70,000 hardbacks at $30 a pop.
Not terrible. So, all right, let's summarize here for a minute. Traditional publishing, it seems more legitimate because it's more historic, and we know big names, Simon and Schuster and Doubleday and all these big names like that. However, and you can often get an advance. I've gotten a significant advance for most of my books that I did. Well, all of my books that I did with traditional publishers. So you don't pay for anything. You don't have to pay for anything. On the negative side of traditional publishing, they own the rights to everything. So if you want to make a film, a documentary, or something based on that book later, you have to get permission from them, even though it's your material, your book. They will often drop the they're still going to leave it up to you to do most of the marketing. I've discovered, like you say, within a month to 3 months, they're done with it. And it's like they move on to the next project. And so the book is in my hands. And so if I'm going to spend all this effort to do the marketing and promotion, that's an interesting thing. And I think the other thing for me would be the schedule, the timeliness issue. If you want to get a book out relatively quickly, they take it, in my experience, they've taken a year from the time I turn in the finished manuscript to the time it actually hit the street. And so there's that factor in there as well. So I think there's pluses and minuses traditional publishing. Also, I think if you're a leader that has a huge audience already, if you're a pastor of a 5,000 to 10,000 member church, maybe, if you have a massive social media following, if you're a celebrity of some kind or a business leader that everybody knows, then a traditional publisher is more interested because you're bringing the audience to them and they don't have to really market so much. So what did I miss here about traditional publishing? Is that pretty much the positives and negatives of traditional?
Here's a couple of factors. Number one, a lot of probably every publisher, their biggest customer is Amazon. And you can get all the books that are sold on Amazon as an author. The other thing is they aren't going to really do the kind of marketing that you think they're going to do. Actually, behind closed doors, they actually call books an A book, a B book, and a C book. And about maybe 10% of all the books they publish are truly the A books. They're the ones that you do what you think they're going to do with the book. They're going to pay for publicity. They're going to, do all those kinds of things. They're going to buy placement in stores and all those kind of extras that publishers will do on certain books. And most of the books fall into the B category, which is they put it on an order form. They do a sales presentation in front of key accounts. They do some other, kind of in basic kind of promotion, depending upon the content of the book and the author's previous book selling history. They may, go with, like a lot of my books, they sell very well in airports, truck stops, and grocery stores. You've seen those spinner racks.
That's great.
It's unreal. I mean, that's why I continue to work with the one publishing house that I work with, is that they have sold hundreds of thousands of books in those outlets because they have this relationship. And there's really one company that does all those sales, if you can believe it. And they're very difficult you can't really get in as an individual author.
Right.
So I have to use, the leverage of the publishing house to get into them. So there's categories of books. They're not all created equal by any stretch of the imagination. And the advantages would be if you can get a decent advance. Those have come down a lot. I've been a vice president of the largest Christian publishing house. I've been the president of a couple other publishing companies, and the advances are, even from when I was back in that world, they're probably across the board about 50% less than they used to be. So
You're talking
And
about
it's
advances. And for people that don't know, an advance is something the publisher will pay you up front for the rights to publish your book.
correct. Well, it's an advance against future royalties. So in
Yeah,
other words,
right.
if they give you $50,000, for example, ahead of time, advance on your book, you have to earn $50,000 worth of royalties
Before you
get
start getting
another
paid.
penny from them.
Yeah.
And a lot of publishers, their performance is judged. A good portion of it is how fast they recoup that advance.
Yeah.
So, and the calculations that they do behind closed doors, typically, and this is a very, very broad statement, is they try to estimate what that book would do in a year, and then they offer that as an advance. That's kind of loosely a loose formula that you could follow to kind of estimate. So if they're only going to give you $5,000, they're not even really that invested in the book, and you want them to give you as much as possible so that they have this compulsion, this desire to earn all that back.
An incentive, yeah.
Yeah, there's an incentive there for the publisher. And
for a while, I thought it'd be easier to get a book deal if I didn't take an advance. And then I realized the more advance they give me, the more incentive they have to get that money back. And so they're going to market it more. So I think that's good. All right, so we've got that. Now let's talk about hybrid or self-publishing. It's interesting that a few years ago, I was the keynote speaker at the Evangelical Publishers Association annual conference. And we had a great time, but one of the speakers was the president of the Hybrid Publishers Association, and she came to kind of present about what's happening in this transition and what people are doing today. And I tell you, it put the fear of God in a lot of these traditional publishers. They started seeing just how popular self-publishing has become. And hybrid is kind of we say the word hybrid because it's a little bit of a mixture between the two. For instance, in my book, working with you guys, it was like self-publishing, except you helped me with the edit. You did the edit on the book. You did the book design. You got it on all the platforms, all those kind of things. So you operate like a publisher, but I invested in it, and we became partners in this thing. So I just think that, let's talk a minute about the positives and negatives about self-publishing or hybrid publishing. Like if I'm going to publish with your company, how does that process work, and what are the pluses and minuses of that?
Well, there are every year there seems to be a little bit more positive that's going in that direction as far as authors, publishing on their own, which I don't actually recommend any author do the whole thing on their own. Very few of them can really pull that off well. So what's happened is there's companies out there like ours that will help people publish their books and give it the quality that you can't tell whether Thomas Nelson or HarperCollins or whoever did the book. We all kind of, truth be known, we all use the same printers, and in a lot of cases we use some of the same designers. So we're able to, through our experience, we have a great relationship with all kinds of people in that world to get the books actually produced well. So, but the advantages are, again, you control everything and you own all the rights. You're never going to lose interest in your book at all. You're never going to lose interest in your book like the publisher will. And, you're always going to be, your publisher's probably not promoting some of those books that you did previously, but you're still going to be interested in your book. You're going to control it. And if you want to update it, you can go back in and do it too. It's a lot of authors go back in, they update their books. And so it's a definite advantage for people that really care about controlling the content and owning all the rights to it forever. So some of the disadvantages also would be there's a lot of people that do this and not all of them do it well. And candidly, not all of them do it ethically. There's a lot of things that are offered online. You can find them everywhere. A lot of extra kind of bells and whistles that you can pay for through the self-publishing or co-publishing or hybrid publishing world that, in my view, is just completely a waste of money.
Yeah.
And we don't really get into helping authors with that. We don't, even though I think they might buy it, I'm not interested in giving it to them, making it available to them unless it's going to benefit them. So you control all of that. The other side is that you have to pay for the cost of it. So you're going to have to make an investment in your book. But you can control how many copies you get. Some people do a small amount. But you can now do, if you want to do one copy, you can do it, but it might cost you $2,000 for that one copy.
Yeah.
I don't understand that, why somebody would spend all their time, all their energies, everything, and then expect it to put it on Amazon and somebody's going to go buy it. It just doesn't work that way. So we are real advocates of people publishing books, stepping out, if you would, by faith and reasonably, and using some of those books as leverage for other things. The other thing that authors should know, that there's so much more benefits to a book than whatever you can sell it for or whatever royalties you can get. And actually, publishers will say a lot of times behind closed doors, they'll say the worst place to sell a book is in a bookstore because the cost to get it in there. For example, Phil, every book you see on the shelf in a bookstore, every one of them is returnable for the life of that book. So that means that if you put, 5 books in every Barnes and Noble, which would be phenomenal, that'd be thousands of books. They can send them all back in 90 days or whenever they want to and get a full refund. And none of those books they can't resell them because they're all going to be damaged. So the publishers, they had to take a great risk. And every single book you see in a store that's on a bin, that's on an end cap, that's face out, any kind of special attention, the publisher is actually paid for that book to be there.
Well, maybe we talk about my book as an example, because we did it through Insight. We did it through with your team. And, I've written now about 10 books, and I'm not a best-selling author. I'm not going to get on, the best-selling author list because I write to a certain niche. I'm writing for mostly leaders, particularly creative leaders who are working in media. So my books are never going to be big sellers. And I've worked with all the traditional big publishing houses, and, just as we discussed, they will promote it for a month or two, maybe 3 at the most, and then they move on to their next project and just kind of leave it dangling. And I put my, blood, sweat, and tears into this thing, and they're expecting me to do all the marketing and promotion anyway, and I'm getting, a very small royalty for the book based on the selling price. And so you and I started talking a couple years ago in the middle of the pandemic when I was writing Maximize Your Influence about trying, working with your team. And so, as you say, I invested money into getting the book published, but you brought in a team that did the editing for me. I do all the writing. I just am an obsessive writer, so I write all my books. But you have writers, a team of writers and editors that will help people write. If you have a great message, but you're not a great writer, you have a team that will help. But I did the manuscript. You guys did the edit. You also gave me multiple book designs to look at. We went through those, and you put the ISBN number and all the different things we have to do to make sure it's going to get on Amazon and BarnesandNoble.com and all those kind of places. And what I discovered was, we shipped, I think we printed like 1,000 copies just for me. We sent them here because we get so many requests, particularly, when I'm speaking at conferences and events, and also through our nonprofit, the Influence Lab, we give the book away for a donation to that. So we wanted to have a supply here that we could send out, that our team can do. And it's just given me total control. I mean, like you say, I could go in tomorrow and we could make a change in the electronic file, the digital file, and update the book if I needed to. Traditional publishers are never going to let me do that. I own all the rights. If I want to do a documentary film or TV show or something, or podcast based on the book, I don't have to ask anybody's permission. I own everything. So I just started comparing the two, the traditional publishing route with the self-publishing route, and realizing my books are more tools to get my message out there. They're great for helping open the door to speaking engagements. Clients will call me because they've read the book and want to work with us. So that's a greater tool. I'm not going to make, a fortune selling books, just from the retail. My books are more tools, and I use them to advance what we're doing and advance the message we're trying to share with the world. And so doing the self, kind of more hybrid publishing route with you was a really smart move, and it ended up being really great. And I think if you look at the book, for those of you listening or watching, if you've gotten a copy of Maximize Your Influence, you'll see it's a totally credible book. I mean, it's done very, very high quality. It's the same kind of book that I've done with major publishers around the country. So I just think that we live in this world where obviously, if I'm going to go out and sell 1 million copies, I could, probably smart to work with a big traditional publisher. But if I'm either new or if I'm a niche writer, if I've got, a certain narrow audience I'm trying to target, maybe a hybrid model is a much better model to go with. And that way I have more control and I end up making more money off the sale of each book as well. So because in fact, I think the money I invested, by the way, for people that are thinking about this, the money I invested to get the book printed, I think we made back within between 30 and 60 days. I mean, we sold enough books because when you print it yourself, you don't, you're making a much bigger royalty when you sell it. So I'm able to make more money off the sale of each book. So within 30 to 60 days, we made that investment back. And then at that point on, it's profit. So I just think that if new people considering this, hybrid is really a significant direction to consider because I think that's the direction the industry is going. Am I wrong?
And think about this. You actually have an extra year pretty much to sell your book. An extra year.
Yeah, you guys did it in a matter of months.
Yeah, I mean,
let's
say maybe an extra 9 months.
Yeah.
And then, when you have these books that are out there working on your behalf, opening doors, connecting you with people, even a person like yourself, Phil, every time you write a book, it even elevates your stature. Yeah. It elevates your credibility. It was funny when I wrote my first book, and I always joke with authors about this. I said, people are going to want your autograph. I've spoken at a writers conference that you've never met me, you don't know anything about me, but in about an hour from now, you're going to want my autograph. It's still fun. I've done 31 titles now in my life, and so it still is amazing to me that, it still creates that. People want that signature on your book, and the credibility side of it is it changes. It just does. Yeah. And that's why it's also, if you do it on your own, listen, do it well. I mean, how many books, for the most part, most of these people are not going to write a lot of books. That may be the only book they do. And the worst thing in the world, and I've seen it, is authors who really don't like their book, who really aren't happy with their book.
Yeah.
And that's why I think, candidly, companies like ours are a blessing to people because we're going to do it well. We want to make sure you love it. We're going to try as hard as we can to do everything we can to help you create a great book and a book that you love and that you're proud of. And so, I would encourage people, if you make that decision, which most people will have to, they really won't have a choice.
Yeah.
Do it well. Don't do anything halfway because people will be able to, they're going to be able to tell the difference. If it's littered with mistakes, if it doesn't look and feel good, it has a lousy title. If it just looks like everything else, it's just not going to happen. So, that's what we're trying to do. I never met a person who actually ever regretted writing a book, but I've met a lot of people who regretted the way the book felt, and the way
it turned out
later on. So, that's what we're committed to doing, and it just kind of evolved over time.
Tell me this: if somebody out there has a story and they want to explore this whole publishing thing, how do they get in touch with you? How do they find you? What do they need to know?
Yeah, and the best way is just to reach out to us. Either you can call, our website is freshword.com. It actually is, it's a dual website. It talks about, my ministry side of things, my personal books, but it also has information about the publishing services and writing services that we provide and editorial services too. That's freshword.com. And then our office number is 918-493-1718. And if you want to email us, it's contact@freshword.com. And
we'll put all that information in the show notes, by the way, for everybody. So if you check the show notes below, you can see all that stuff in there so you can contact John and figure out how to do this better. So, all right, last word. You got one last thing to say to encourage people to get their story out there. What would you say?
I believe you ought to do it. I mean, you should do it well, do it the best that you can. It's all God ever requires of us is to do the best we can with what we have, where we're at. And that's what I encourage people to do. If God's given you a desire to write a book, or you have something that's really genuinely helped people, and that's the key to me. If there's something that you've done, something that that you can give, that's going to answer the big questions that people have about that topic, solve the biggest problems, and you've already proven that it works, you must write your book. And no matter what it takes, you need to do it. And if you want to use, I'd be honored to help anybody that finds themselves in that situation. So that's the thing I would encourage you to do.
Well, and I would touch on something you said earlier, which is don't just magically assume that once you publish the book, it's going to sell tons. Just the fact that it's on Amazon, it doesn't mean people are going to buy it. You have to think about, okay, what can I do to generate interest about this? I have a whole marketing plan that we've created that we give to our clients at Cooke Media Group about, what to do at conferences. And if you get a chance to speak at your church, or you get a chance to do this workshop somewhere, or how, what all the different ways you can market your book, because you do need to have a plan. If those copies are just sitting in your garage, they're not going to move magically. You have to be thinking from the start about who wants this book, how do I reach that audience, and how do I get it out there. So I'd encourage you, talk to John. He's the master at this. I think he does remarkable work, and his team is fantastic to work with. And I just believe people need to get their story out there. So get out there, start writing, start calling, get the word out, and start figuring out how to get that book published. John, thank you. I'm so grateful that John Mason would come on and talk about publishing today, because I get so many emails and calls from people saying, I have a story inside me. I want to get out there in the form of a book, and I have no idea how to start. We also have a lot of clients with our team at Cooke Media Group. We have a lot of pastors, ministry leaders, business executives who want to do a book, or they're in the process of doing a book, and they have so many questions. And that industry is changing. I think publishing is going through the radical change that music went through about 10 years ago. So we need to stay on top of that if we're going to get our story out there. Also, I talk about publishing in my book, Maximize Your Influence, How to Make Digital Media Work for Your Church, Your Ministry, and You. Publishing is a big part of the digital revolution that's happening right now. So you can get even more of your questions answered about publishing in my book. And remember, you can get it by going to Amazon if you want to, or you can make a donation to the Influence Lab. The Influence Lab is our nonprofit designed to help teach and train Christians internationally to use the media to share the gospel with the world. That's such an important thing. The world of missions has changed. Now that the digital revolution is happening, we need to stop thinking about missions just in terms of geographical boundaries and start thinking about missions in terms of digital boundaries. So your financial support really helps us make that happen. We're able to take teams of Christian professionals, many based here in Hollywood, overseas to work with churches, ministry organizations, conferences, seminars, events that gather Christians together who are involved in media and have a goal to learn how to use social media, video, television, so many other things to share the gospel in this digital generation. So thanks for your support. Appreciate what you do there. Remember, share this. You know somebody that needs to publish a book or has a story they want to get out there, share this episode with them. Give us a rating. Thanks so much for being a part of this community. I really do appreciate it, and we'll see you on the next episode.